Okay, good morning. Aloha. Happy to be
No,
back
wait,
again.
wait, wait, Dr. Corey.
Oh, okay.
We are not online. We are not online.
Okay, you let me know then.
Yes, in 2 minutes you are.
Perfect.
Okay, you can go.
Okay, aloha. Good morning. Thank you for being here again. We changed our day to Thursday. So again, Queen Nadia, I really appreciate that. I teach in a wellness college and for the curriculum for the students for graduation, 10 weeks is mornings and 10 weeks is evenings to make sure that all of the students can come to the classes that they need for graduation. So Queen Nadia was so gracious to let me change my days to Thursdays. So I will be teaching Thursday, Paris evening, my morning from here on out. And I do appreciate that again, getting organized in a new city and new schedules. And it's been definitely a work in progress, but I feel very grounded now. So I wasn't able to finish a lot of my thoughts last week. Sometimes we get questions, and then I'll touch on that information, and then I kind of lose a little bit of my train of thought. And I was struggling a bit with the screen sharing last time, so I was able to pull up these images and share them. That's why I have them here for you first today. But before we get too far into today's information, I needed to correct where I misspoke last time. I noticed when I first brought up Papa Henry, who was a very well-known and fairly famous Hawaiian medicine man, I mentioned that it was turmeric or oleno that he did not highly recommend, and then I corrected it later as noni fruit, but I do want to correct that. So noni is what I had meant to say, but I had been distracted trying to screen share. So let me show you here the noni fruit, which I went over briefly, that grows in the tropics. So Papa Henry did not recommend the noni. Noni traditionally is used in Tahiti, and then has traveled through the different, Polynesian islands. I'm not sure if Tahiti was the first place that it was used, but that is one of the very regions where it's used very, I guess, prevalently. But it is a canoe plant that went over to Hawaii. That is a very, very strong blood cleaner, stomach cleaner. It's been used for cancer, for all sorts of infections. And again, Papa Henry was not a big proponent of using it. Actually, from my instructor directly was Janella Keopuiva, and she worked directly with Papa Henry, and she had stated that Papa never recommended using noni. But then there are other la'au. La'au, again, is the Hawaiian word for herb medicine. Other la'au practitioners are advocates of noni, and I personally really adore noni. And here's another picture of the fruit here. So generally, you wait for the fruit it will ripen on the tree and it will fall off. So a lot of times you will just collect the noni fruits that have already dropped to the ground. You can get them just before they drop. When they're green, they take a while, but they'll get really like mushy. They get kind of mushy and they bruise. And as I had stated, they smell a little bit like a rotting cheese or very fermented cheese, like a Limburger cheese. It's a very like kind of pungent smell, strong smell. And traditionally what you would do is you'd have a glass jar. You could just even throw the noni into the glass jar, and then eventually that juice will just sort of collect in the bottom of the jar. Or I've seen it where people will put like kind of sticks through it and then have the juice drip, or put like a cheesecloth and just have the juice drip into that jar. And then that would be the fresh raw noni juice that you would drink. And then, like I had said, that I really enjoy the fermented, personally enjoy the fresh fermented noni. So that's where you let it ferment a little bit longer and it gets those good microbes in it. And last week I touched really briefly on the benefits of fermented foods for the immune system, for stimulating new immune cell production. And science is now kind of proving what a lot of traditional practitioners have been saying for a very long time, that the immune system, that we do generate a lot of our new immune system cells through microbes that are in our gut. So again, talking about gut flora and health of microbes in our system and the importance of it for our health. And so we talked about the noni fruit, we talked about Papa Henry, and I wanted to show you these images so you had an idea of what I was talking about. So this does grow in tropical regions. Then moving over to the turmeric, which in Hawaiian is olena, and Papa Henry did use lots of olena. Most practitioners, La'au practitioners, do incorporate olena, and olena can be used topically and internally. Again, I mentioned in Ayurveda, it's in almost all Ayurvedic formulas as well. It's tridoshic. So what that means is it's both warming and cooling. And so basically that's almost a sense of like an adaptogen. I don't know if technically turmeric is an adaptogen, but in Ayurvedic medicine, it's considered to balance all of the doshas. So if you're too hot, it will be cooling. If you're too cold, it will be warming. And it's just a basic, very, very good blood cleaner. And also I was saying that it's very, very anti-inflammatory. And so that its anti-inflammatory properties are as great as like an ibuprofen. I have read a number of science journals on that. Ibuprofen used to be recommended and was said to be very benign and safe for use, although if you were using it with alcoholic beverages, you shouldn't have more than 2 alcoholic beverages because it could cause issues with liver problems. But recent studies have come out and shown that regular use of ibuprofen can increase your risk of heart attack by 50%. So it's not as benign as they said. There are other forms of anti-inflammatories that you can use, such as turmeric. But again, turmeric is also a blood thinner. So if you're taking blood thinners, if you're on aspirin, on regular aspirin, generally the use for aspirin is, if you were prescribed, generally speaking, aspirin for use for blood thinning, if you are a heart patient, that is generally to thin the blood as well. So turmeric has that action of thinning the blood, but it's also very antiseptic, antibacterial, antifungal, works great for acne, inflammatory conditions, heat conditions. And I had started really briefly speaking about the staph and strep bacteria, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus bacterium, that are always kind of living in our nasal cavities and in our ears, right? So ear, nose, throat's all connected. And the way that the system works, the way that the body works is usually things will get kind of in this area first and then start to move down. You have your tonsils here, which really are, they say, or they used to say, and I don't even know what they say now, but a lot of people get tonsillectomies, but they will become inflamed. But that's because the tonsils are to protect the body from that infection going into the lungs. Because one of the things that happens when you have a flu or a cold, one of the things that can exacerbate that and make that condition very dangerous is when it goes into a secondary infection with pneumonia. And so we've heard a lot of this with COVID, right? A lot of people getting very sick from secondary lung infections with the pneumonia. So our systems are very intelligent and are designed to trap all this here before it gets into our lungs, right? I had my tonsils removed at 2, so sad. But that happens, right? I've also heard that there is, and I don't know, I haven't researched this, but I have heard in my history of this field that appendix and tonsils are closely related. And sometimes when tonsils are removed, you can later have issues with appendix. They used to say that the appendix also wasn't necessary, but the appendix actually provides a lubrication to the intestines that can be beneficial and healing to the intestines. So I don't believe that God puts parts in our body that we don't really need. We may be able to survive without them, but everything has a function and a purpose. My tonsils actually started to try to grow back, which I thought was pretty cool. So I encourage them to do that. But getting back, then that was just a little bit of trivia for you. Getting back to the nose and the ears. So with the Olena, and I was speaking that in the tropics, when we're talking about tropical conditions and we're talking about fungus and we're talking about bacteria, we're talking about the bacteria that even will continue to live in the ocean because the temperature never really fluctuates that greatly, that when you have a more weakened immune system, you are more susceptible to the bad, what we would call the bad strains of bacteria multiplying and colonizing in our nasal cavities and in our ears, right? Which is where they live. So one of the traditional practices in Hawaii, which if you're an ocean person, which I was a surfer and a diver, swimmer, always in the ocean, very susceptible to these staph and strep, because you'll get cuts from the coral, you'll get cuts from the rocks, but it will enter the body. But again, it can colonize, and then you can come up with a chronic condition. So one of the things that, sorry, my cat is joining us right now, and she's a little distracting, is to juice the noni root, the noni, see, I keep doing it, the turmeric root. You juice the turmeric root, you get that juice, it's a very strong juice, and you would actually take like a dropper full into each nasal cavity, right? So through the nostril, each nostril, and you would suck it back. It will go through. Also, we think about the blood-brain barrier is right here. So it's cleansing on that. It will come down into the throat. It coats the throat, and then you also put it into the ears. So that was something that I began to do regularly because I would start to get a little bit, you can see where you will get like a little acne, and then you'll get a secondary infection with a staph or strep bacterium, and that was from the ocean. So we're a practice that that I do personally, that traditional La'au practitioners would do, is that the first sign of like a little bit of a sore throat or a stuffy nose is to go ahead and, in Ayurveda, you would use a neti pot, which is salt water in the nose, right? Which in Hawaii, you would traditionally go down to the ocean and bathe in the salt water. You would get the salt water into your nose, right? Salt is very antiseptic, antibacterial, and I mentioned that, I think, in the last class as well. But the neti pot is an Ayurvedic, tool where you actually flush the nostrils out. So if you're having issues with sinuses and you're getting congestion in here and you're getting infection in here, you could first flush the sinus cavities out on either side with the neti pot, and then you could follow it with the turmeric. But know that it is actually will burn. It burns quite a lot. It's quite intense, but it just wipes anything out, at least in my personal experience. And again, I say all of this for educational purposes. I just need to reiterate that I don't prescribe, I'm not recommending, I am not trying to treat medically, but I am educating you with what I know from my experience as studying traditional medicine techniques and practices. So again, here in this image, we have the ground turmeric, which you can buy. I just buy the seasoning, the organic, already pre-ground seasoning. I did grow my own Olena turmeric in Hawaii, and you would take the root. I could shred the root, so you could, or grate the root. You would grate the root. You can let it dry. You would take a mortar and pestle, which I have a mortar and pestle. I'll bring it next time. But and then grind it down to a powder after it's dry, and then you can store it on your shelf. You can juice the root and get the liquid. You can grate the root. If you don't have a juicer, you can grate the fresh root, and you can take a cheesecloth and you can squeeze it. And I mentioned briefly that I might do a demo class. So the more I'm describing these things to you, the more I'm thinking that I might do a class where I take the root and actually demonstrate various ways you can preserve it, and you can use it. You can keep it on your shelf for storage for later use as well. And it's not a hard or difficult plant to grow. It likes warmer climates. It grows similar to a ginger. And again, the root part of the plant is the plant that we use for the Olena of the turmeric. Again, it was a canoe plant that came over when the Polynesians first came and colonized the Hawaiian Islands. And historically, the Polynesians were great explorers, great navigators of the sea, and had a very detailed chart of the stars and how to chart their way around to different places via their large canoes. Currently, the hokulia, I don't know where it is now because I've moved away from Hawaii, but the hokulia is a traditional Hawaiian ship that they built, that they are doing peace missions around the different islands into New Zealand and into Polynesia, and going through a lot of the old charting their way. I think they actually did a round the world trip. So you can look that up. That's the Hokulia, Hokulia, I believe. Maybe I'll look it up and share with you a little bit next time. But great navigators of the sea. So there was a lot of trade that took place. And that's why when we get into the canoe plants, we're not always 100% sure what plants were brought over specifically in the canoes, and then what plants. As far as when we think of niu, we think of coconut, we think of kaimani, which is also tamanu. Those are both from Africa. So we're not certain if they were brought necessarily on the canoes or they floated over. But the Olena, or the turmeric here, which we see, was brought over and probably was originally traded with India by the Polynesians. So they did trade and get a lot of their medicines. There was very bustling trade between Polynesia and some of the surrounding areas, India, Africa, and some of the surrounding islands. They know that. So this was a very important medicinal plant for them. And so I think I have kind of covered the turmeric, but I think that's a very vital herb. I use it daily. I take it daily for inflammation. It's a very good tonic herb for daily use. So I do think that might be one that I will maybe do a demo with how to use. I had spoken about doing rayasana and showing you how to make a rayasana. And rayasana is an Ayurvedic way to preserve herbs, and it's preserved in, traditionally is preserved in ghee, but when I would make my rayasanas in Hawaii, I would preserve them in coconut oil, and that acts as a natural preservative, plus the properties of the plants. So very cool. So I'm going to close this now, see if I can close this, stop sharing here. There we go. Ooh, I'm getting it down. Thanks for being patient with me on the screen share. So any questions about the turmeric or the noni fruit before moving on today? No? Okay.
Yes, Dr. Corey,
yes.
This noni is a fruit. So what do you advise to eat? You can eat it like that? It's a
You
fruit.
don't really eat the noni too much. You take the juice. It's a very, like I said, it's I would almost say that it's an acquired taste. I don't. It's like I said, it's like a very like a Limburger cheese or something, like a smelly cheese. It's very. Some people can't even take it because it has such a strong smell. But usually you take about 1 ounce of the juice, or 1 to 2 ounces of the juice. And like I said, some La'au practitioners, like Papa Henry, would say that never use the noni. And some would say that it's just an amazing medicine that can, be used as a therapeutic with cancer. When I would take it, I would take about 2 ounces. You want to take it on an empty stomach. You can order the juice. I think they have it in tablets and capsules. I don't think that's quite as potent. I would try to get the raw juice, and I would get the raw juice from the farmer's market. I had a friend also who had a lot of noni plants growing on her land, so I would get right from her. But they do need really warm tropical climate. So I couldn't even grow it because I was up the mountain and my temperature was too cool for it. So noni generally grows right down by the coast, along with the kaimani tree, which usually grows right on the water. And I talked about the kaimani or the tamanu last week a little bit about the oil for the skin. So again, the noni is something you would take on an empty stomach, usually 1 to 2 ounces. It's a really great thing to take if you're starting to feel like you're getting a little bit sick, like that first kind of sign. Some of the first signs of getting sick, could be a little bit sneezing, a little bit of that scratchy sort of sore throat. Maybe your ears feel a little bit sensitive, maybe a slight headache. These are sort of symptoms that your body's starting a little bit of a detox process. So when the body starts to detox, we become just more vulnerable to these things. And it could be that we have been not getting enough sleep, we've not been eating healthy enough, overexertion, overwork, over stress. Stress, and I cannot say it enough, that any condition, anything that you have going on, absolutely anything that you have going on in your body, physically, physiologically, will be exacerbated by stress. So all medical conditions can become worsened by stress or prolonged stress. And we spoke briefly about the holy basil or the tulsi and how that's a very divine plant about 2 weeks ago. And holy basil is one of those plants that's very good for calming the nerves. And in plant medicine and herb medicine, anything that's calming to the nervous system is called a nervine. So Nervine, that's an herbalist term. So that means calming to the nerves. So the tulsi is, and I think, I would think of lemon balm, and I would think of oat straw, and I would think of passion flower and valerian root. These are all nervines. They're calming to the nervous system. So yeah, and so is meditation and prayer and some of the other things that we touched on. So thank you for the question on the noni fruit.
Another question, please, for you. Can we, for example, the juice of noni, can we mix it with another product like turmeric? We can put together the taste.
I mean, you could. Traditionally, it's suggested to take on an empty stomach because it can make you feel nauseated, not because it would affect the properties of it. Oh, I see. How much is too much? I would just say 1 to 2 ounces a day. You'll get a very, very, very thorough cleanse from it, let's just say. So I will share with you a quick experience I had, right? So we discussed briefly viruses, a little bit, immune system last week, immune system blueprint, immune system memory, how our body's able to memorize things that have invaded us and then creates these antibodies in the system. And also research is showing how viruses continue to sort of live in our body, in the synovial fluid, in the cerebral spinal fluid. We don't necessarily completely get them out of our system. We really are made up of thousands and millions microbes. We're all microbes, right? And everything around us is microbes, right? That being said, so when we think about chickenpox, right? We get chickenpox when we're little, and later chickenpox can represent as shingles, right? They're the same virus. And so I had an interesting experience with noni, and I'm not sure if I would attribute it to noni or I would attribute it to just the stress that was going on in my life at the time. But I was taking a lot of noni at that time. I was going through a lot of stress, and I was pretty young. I think I was like 30, 35 maybe, pretty young, right? So shingles is something that usually attacks elderly, right? If you've had chickenpox when you were young. And I think I had chickenpox around 6 or 7 years old. And I was taking probably way too much noni because, as I said, I really like the taste of it. So I was drinking probably more than 6 ounces a day. I really liked it, and it didn't make me nauseated. I loved it. But I was out surfing and I felt this sort of stinging on my back, right? And I felt that maybe I got stung by a jellyfish. I thought, oh, was that a jellyfish sting, you know? But it just kept feeling worse and worse, right? And so I went in and got checked, and it was actually shingles. And I thought, well, that's weird. And even the doctor, that's so weird. You're so young to have shingles, right? But then I started to really research more on noni and more on actually the chickenpox virus, that it sort of lives in the stomach tissue. Now, I don't quote me exactly, but I was researching it quite a bit at that time because I was going through it. And I do recall reading somewhere, and that's what I say, I can't quote the journal, but that it was one of those viruses that lives in like the stomach tissue, stomach lining, and that noni is this very strong stomach cleanser. And so I thought perhaps it actually pushed the virus out of my system, and I was responding by having shingles. Now, that was my own personal experience. I can't back that up with any kind of scientific validity or anything, but it seemed to resonate for me, and so that's my story. And so that's what it was for me. That was my experience. I haven't had shingles since. That was a number of years ago. And so I believe that it just pulled that old virus out of my system. And sometimes you hear some of these chronic conditions that people have, that chronic fatigue or issues like this, where they'll relate it to like Epstein-Barr virus, which is the mononucleosis virus, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's mono, or has to do with, is the virus that causes mononucleosis, that if you've had mononucleosis, that you have Epstein-Barr. But that sometimes these chronic fatigue syndromes that we see that are elusive, and doctors can't really pinpoint why this person is having this general malaise and they're exhausted all the time, is that our bodies have a viral overload. So that we've come into contact with all of these microbes in the course of our existence, and that our bodies need to detox, right? And because we're not having a good, thorough detoxing, we get overloaded. Our systems get overloaded, and for whatever reason, whether our organs are exhausted from trying to process the number of toxins that we're bombarded with. So, you know, we'll get into chemical toxins and things of that at another time. I'm trying to stay as much with the Hawaiian theme today as possible, as promised. But as we're exposed to all of these chemicals that are in foods, the herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, environmental pollutants from plastics and exhaust from cars, and you know, our systems are constantly trying to cleanse and process these things. And so we have our excretory system, right, which is our skin, our intestines, our kidneys and bladder, urinary tract, right? All of these systems that lymphatic system that cleanses and purges these things, right? But we can get overloaded and overwhelmed, and our organs can start to get what would be called in like say Chinese medicine, what would be called sluggish organs, right? So things aren't moving well enough, moving quick enough, and so we get congested. So that's where we need to do these frequent cleanses. And again, hopping back over to Ayurveda, that would be when you would go through something like a panchakarma, where you would deeply cleanse the organ systems of the body to bring them back to their optimal functioning. And so even if we want to go into a mechanistic model, you can think about your car, and when you clean your oil, and when you say drain your transmission fluid, and all of these things keep your car running longer and better and functioning better, right? So our bodies are similar to that. Okay, so again, going back to last week, and then what we did discuss again was this concept of animism when we're talking about Native cultures. So when we're talking about Native Hawaiian practitioners, when we're talking about Native American practitioners, when we're talking about most tribal cultures, so ancient, egalitarian, hunting and gathering cultures, general held belief, if you look globally, tended to be towards animism. And that is the idea that all things, living and non-living, have their own spirits, so that the rocks have their spirits, and the spirits of the water, and there's tree spirits, and there's animal spirits, and that there's not a hierarchy in the same way that we see a hierarchy today, right? And that we have this idea that humans are on the top and everything else is beneath us, because this concept of our concept of creation is that we were formed in God's image and that we are at the top, right? And that has been our predominant kind of Western philosophy. But when we go back to animism and we look, we see that everything is a cousin or a brother or a sister or an uncle or an aunt or mother or father, right? Father sky, mother earth, her brother and sister, you know, cats, trees, right? Waterfalls, all these things have their own spirits. So everything again is taken with great reverence. And this is that component that we miss in modern medicine, the integral nature of all things and the interconnectedness of all things and the reverence and the gratitude and all of the ways in which we approach everything in existence, including ourselves and our health and our well-being, right? But that shifting of that consciousness and that awareness. So I know I had said that I would share a couple of stories with you, and then I will share the practice, a little bit of the practice of Ho'oponopono with you before we close today, which is a little meditation that you can do. So pule, again, pule is the Hawaiian word for prayer. So when you practice lomi lomi, which is again the Hawaiian style massage, and that's the style of one of the styles of massage that I practice. Again, hand healing is one of the most ancient forms of healing, and even if you look into, say, acupuncture, right? Well, they will say when you have a very master acupuncturist will use their fingers to touch, right? They don't even need the needles, because it's the intention of the energy that is doing that healing, right? The conscious intention of your energy, and there's an energy exchange. So there's this electromagnetic field that we have, right? And wow, this electromagnetic field, like you can see that, like hammerhead sharks, that's what they look for, is electromagnetic energy. And even with bird migrational patterns, they're saying that sometimes that these EMFs from our cell towers are upsetting the migratory patterns of birds and whales, actually, because it's interrupting these electromagnetic signals. So there's this whole electromagnetic world. And we touched on that just a little bit, of thinking about our energetic systems in our body, our meridian systems, our energy exchange with others and with everything in the planet, right? So when you work with your hands with Lomi, or when you work, even if you're doing acupressure, which I do acupressure, or Reiki, or pranic healing, or any of these energetic healings, it's all really with intention. And that intention is the energy force, the life force energy moving through you and into the person you're working on. So there's this big reverence that you have to approach this with, because you are asking permission to help facilitate another person's healing. So it's a different bedside manner, right? You hear bedside manner with doctors, right? And sometimes with the mechanistic model and the allopathic medicine, it's very like cut and dry, and what's your symptoms, and what are we doing, and what are we treating, like as if you are a machine, right? Input output system. And then there's this whole other level of existence that is sort of bypassed or ignored, our higher consciousness, whatever you want to call it, but that spirit aspect of ourselves, that energy aspect of ourselves, that sadly Western allopathic medicine has forgotten when they were so busy chunking us down into parts. And so now they send us off to all these different specialists, you know, the psychiatrist and the gastrointestinal specialist and the different doctors that we go see, instead of understanding that we're this whole being, and that our emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being and health affects our physicality greatly. So when we get into energy, first it starts in the energy field, right? And then it concentrates, when we talked about energy before, energy density. So the denser and denser and denser, so the slower moving molecules, until we get into a material existence. So a quick story. So one of the ways that traditional tribal cultures share and educate and teach is through story. Written language I brought up was, came about really, as far as we know, as far as history is concerned, history meaning anything after writing, the written word. So history means written, right? So anything prior is prehistory. That doesn't mean that there's not a lineage or a tradition or stories. It's just that they were not written down, but they were handed down orally, oral tradition. Sometimes in Hawaii was through mele, which is songs, and through dance, right, which is movement and dance. And of course in hula, you have the hand motions, which actually are telling the story of the mele. And then the chants, you have the Hawaiian chanting, which they chant the entire cosmology. So the olelos, the poetry, it chants the history, the cosmology, the creation stories are all passed down in these traditions, so that they're not lost, and they're there in the song and the dance. And there's this very large, big cultural rebirthing in Hawaii, reclaiming of their cultural past, because the dancing and the surfing and the singing and all of these things were at one time outlawed by the missionaries. So there is a reclamation of the history, prehistory, technically stating prehistory. So storytelling is a big form of transmission of information. And so I will share with you a couple of my personal stories that are related to my connection, interconnectedness with the creatures that I met and learned to love and consider to be family. So in Hawaii. So in Hawaii, your totem animal, totem meaning your sacred animal, Native American would say totem animal, is a particular animal that calls to you, that's a family member. You feel as though you are related, that is your brother, your sister, directly related. And you would have a totem herb, right? In Native American tradition, there's a totem herb, which is that special plant that you feel directly, you are connected to that lineage. And in Hawaii, that name would be your aumakua. And your aumakua is your familial tie to an animal. What is your aumakua? Your spirit animal, your spirit guide. For me, mine was the io, which is a Hawaiian hawk. And so I will tell you a brief story. So, you know, in this course of my life, has been long, and I've been on this sort of path of natural medicine and spiritual path from childhood. And in the course of that, you know, started yoga very young, probably 8 years old. You know, my parents were not into it, so I kind of was drawn to these things. And so one of the things that I did have was that I was always exceedingly connected with animals and talked to the animals. I was an only child, so I had a lot of animals, and I'm still very connected. I had a lot of animals in Hawaii. I had a little farm with lots of cute critters. And so one of the ethical dilemmas that I ran into was, you know, eating meat was really rough on me as a child, and I was a part of Western culture, and so I did become a vegetarian and early on, and I wasn't vegetarian raised, and it wasn't part of my family. It was just that I didn't want to do that anymore. And at that time, that was a very unusual thing in my culture. It wasn't like today where there's so many vegetarian restaurants. It's very common in the West. It was very uncommon. My mother was freaking out. She didn't have any idea what she would feed me. But I also have celiac, which is an autoimmune issue where I cannot absorb or digest gluten. So I ended up having a very long, difficult healing path myself, trying to discover what was wrong. So it took probably 20 years to discover this. So in the course of that, I tried a number of different health diets trying to get well. And so one of the things that I was asked to do was to eat meat, and it was really difficult, and I had a hard time making peace with that. So I had felt, actually a friend of mine who was Native American really started to talk with me about it, but the idea that if I was not able to hunt and take care of my own animal meat, that I probably should not be eating it, that I was a hypocrite if I had to have somebody else do it for me. So that began my journey of hunting in Hawaii. So I took up shooting bow hunting. And I did explain last week that in Native American practice, if you take an animal or you take an herb, that you pray and that you're grateful to the plant and you ask permission. In Hawaii, there is an issue with invasive species. Hawaii is very similar to the Galapagos in that it's very, very, very far away from any other landmass. And as I explained last week, the Hawaiian Islands came about from volcanic eruptions, right? So they did not break off from another landmass. So most of the species of flora and fauna on the island evolved there. So they're very, very unique. And then with the canoe came the pig. With the boats came the rats. And the mosquitoes. There didn't used to be mosquitoes. And with the settlers came goats and sheep, right? So these animals have since escaped and bred to the point where they are horribly invasive and are threatening very many endemic species of plants. So like the silver swords, the only place they're found, there's a Maui silver sword and there's a Hawaii silver sword, and it's only found on the top of Mauna Kea, the only place in the whole world. You know, the hello berries. Some of these plants, the hapu'u ferns, are being destroyed by the pigs, right? So there is this federal government program where these sheep and goats that have just overtaken Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, they're everywhere, are just devastating because the ruminants, which is these goats and sheep, very, very destructive. They will just completely eliminate all of the plant species. So there's a government program where the federal government goes up in these helicopters and just massively kills all these animals. These animals have escaped from these farms. But then they would not let the hunters harvest the meat. It was this whole thing. They weren't even letting the hunters harvest the meat. So I had to sit with this for a while, and this made sense to me that this was a more righteous ending for these animals to be hunted and the meat used to feed families than to just be obliterated by these guns from these helicopters. So I took up bow hunting. And so the experience that I had on the mountain that was very profound and was a great blessing to me was the one time I was out and we were bow hunting, and I am not a good shot. And to this day, I have yet to actually shoot an animal. Though I can clean them and I can prepare the meat, I still haven't been able to do that. I can't even kill fish. So I mostly eat vegetarian now. Now that I figured it all out, But it was, we were bow hunting, and I was with a friend of mine who's an amazing, amazing hunter. And if you're an amazing hunter, when you bow hunt, the idea is that it's so silent. It doesn't startle the animals. There's no stress for the animals. And if you get a very good lung shot, the animal dies very quickly and peacefully. And he was an amazing shot and could hit the lung every time. But when you hunt, there's a whole thing. You prepare the entirety of the animal. You don't waste any of the animal ever. And you take one animal, and that one animal can feed a family for like 6 months if you're preparing it properly with making the broth and storing the meat properly. You don't take large pieces of meat and just eat them. You make stews and you add vegetables and you make broth and you use bone, and it's all very, and you pray and you are grateful for the animal. And there's a whole ritual, just in the same way that you harvest herbs or vegetables, right? You are taking life to sustain your own life. And in the idea of animism, no life is greater than any other life. It's just the nature of things that one life sustains another life. And that's just that idea of birth and death. So, you know, profound, deep thoughts on taking life and life being sacred. And so, again, these invasive species that were devastating, the endemic species, we were crouched. I have this great sense of smell, so they used to like to take me because I could smell the animals, you know, miles and miles away. And we were crouched down waiting for a herd of mouflon sheep. These mouflon had escaped, one or two had escaped from farmers or ranchers, and then had bred wild and were wild up on Mauna Loa. And we were crouched down waiting, and there was this huge, huge, huge herd of animals, and we were very, very, very quiet. And we watched this huge herd of sheep. And I don't know that there was what felt like to me a little bit of telepathy between the animals, because one animal separated itself and ran directly towards us, and the entire herd ran the other way. And so the feeling was that this herd, this one animal, sacrificed itself for the entire herd, which was very profound and a very powerful experience for me. And of course, we prayed and we gave gratitude to the animal. And then we cleaned the animal in the tree. We hung it in the tree to clean the animal. And as we were cleaning this animal, I looked up, and about a foot away from me was this eo, this white hawk. And so the white is an albino hawk, which is very, very rare. And in Hawaiian mythology or the idea of Pele appears as white creatures. Pele is the fire goddess. And again, I was living on Kilauea, which is Pele's home. That's her, where she generally resides, is in the Kilauea caldera. What is it now? Halemaumau is the crater, but yeah, that caldera up there is Pele's home, and I was living about 12 miles from there. So there was this hawk, maybe 1 foot away, just staring at me. And so I did take off a large part of the meat and I hung it up on the branch to give to the hawk. And it took the meat. That was pretty amazing. And so we cleaned it all. I took the organs. I took all parts of the animal to prepare food. And the next, within that week, and I don't know whether it was the next day, again, I told you I was in the La'au forest, and my mission and my goal and my feeling was to preserve these trees. That was the whole reason, because these trees are now endangered. And I had a lot of experiences with these trees, and those are other stories for other days. But there were these beautiful trees. And my kitchen window, so I was surrounded by old growth forest. It was virgin forest. And in my kitchen window, I looked out and I looked up and I saw a white eo. And I think it was the same bird from Mauna Loa, which was a whole mountain away. But the white hawk is so rare. And again, the spirit of Pele comes to mind. And it was there for 3 days. And 3, of course, is a very auspicious number. It was there for 3 days, and then I never saw it again. But it moved from the tree by the kitchen window to the tree down at the end of the driveway. And it would go back and forth as though it had a message or it was watching for me. So I did read about the EO and like what the meaning of it is if you see the EO. And so the interesting thing is that the EO takes the prayers to Keakua, which is the heavens, to the gods. So without the EO, the prayers cannot get to the heavens. But the EO needs the ohia, which is the tree, because the EO lives in the ohia forest. And so I felt that I was there to protect those trees, to preserve the life, help preserve the life of the EO so that the prayers could continue to get to the heavens. So that was one of the stories that I had. And at that point, I realized that the EO was my Amakua. And I will never forget that beautiful little white face. It was like the most beautiful bird I had ever seen. And so that is my story. And I have stories of honus, which are turtles. And maybe I'll share that, a little bit about mind and consciousness and awareness. But we talked a bit about pule and prayer. And so I'm going to briefly leave you with Ho'oponopono. And in recent years, Ho'oponopono seems to have spread quite a bit. And it is a traditional, I guess if you want to say, almost like a counseling, where you would kuka, which is bring it to the table, you would talk. In Hawaii, you talk through things, right? But Ho'oponopono is a ceremony. It's a forgiveness ceremony. It's a healing ceremony. It's a form of healing, a form of letting things go. And when you have practiced Ho'oponopono properly, it says that you've made peace. So if you have 2 families or 2 family members or 2 people, 2 cousins that are having conflict, you would practice Ho'oponopono to make peace, so that you could move forward. So the practice of Ho'oponopono, and what's interesting is when we look at Ho'oponopono, yes, we are looking at the other individual we are trying to make peace with, but also we're understanding that there's the concept of microcosm, macrocosm, and then beyond the beyond, where we all are part of this oneness, right? This interconnectedness, that we are all one, that there is no you, that there is no me, that it just it's just all of existence is one. So that when you're saying these practices, you're also saying it within yourself, to yourself, because by saying this to yourself, it is healing yourself, which indirectly is healing others because of this oneness. So it's really deep practice. It can be considered a prayer meditation. It's something that you can practice in your mind and think of people in your life that you may want to practice forgiveness with, but also yourself. I was even speaking to my students the other day that we are terribly mean to ourselves, like meaner to ourselves than probably even our worst enemies. Sometimes the things that we say to ourselves are so hateful. And so I think that sometimes we should listen to how we speak to ourselves and ask ourselves if we would speak to our child that way, or to the person that we love the most that way. And if we would not, then we should stop talking to ourselves that way. So the practice of Ho'oponopono in practice is very simple, although it's very deep and powerful. It's a simple practice. And the words are, I am sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. So when we meditate on these things, I am sorry. I am sorry for the things I've done to you. I'm sorry for the things I've done to myself. I'm sorry. You're asking for forgiveness. Please forgive me. Please forgive me to the person you're speaking with, but please forgive yourself. Can you forgive yourself? Sometimes people can forgive us before we're even able to forgive ourselves. I thank you. Thank you already. Thank you in advance. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for forgiving me. And I love you. I love you. I love myself. I love myself. I love you, right? Love yourself. Love others as you love yourself. But again, love yourself as you love others. Sometimes loving ourselves in this hypercritical society is one of the hardest things that we can do. I don't know. It's very difficult because we hear so much criticism about ourselves. So give yourselves a break. I think that about wraps it up. So I have time for questions if anybody has any questions. No questions. Okay, good. So if there are no further questions.
I don't have
Yes.
question. I don't think that's how people have questions. Maybe Emmanuel, you want to say something? But the only thing that I can tell you, Dr. Corey, I was listening to you, and you are just an amazing personality. You are so pure. There's such a vibration in your voice that is coming from heaven. And you are so, so pure. Your way of explaining your purity, you are just pure. And I love your purity. And thank you for being in our lives.
Thank you.
Not only in mine, but in our lives, because you can make an impact to heal the humanity. And welcome to our family. Welcome. And it will be my pleasure to go with you in Hawaii and explore all the things there.
I can share everything with you. We can go pick the ohelo berries.
Yes, I will come. I will come with
you. You will taste them. They're delicious.
Yes, I want to test everything. And for sure this year I'm going to Hawaii. But
well, I have to meet you there because I no longer live there.
Yeah, I am going for a conference there. I am invited in one conference there. So I have to go. I promised to go to give this speech. So I would love to have you also there with us to meet you. And then we will, let's say, enjoy the food there. I want to see several things.
We'll have to take you to my island, my big
Yes,
island.
you have to.
And we'll go see Pele.
Yeah.
In person, up close and personal.
Yes, I would love.
That would be such an honor. So yeah, please, let me know. I need advance for these things because I have you know, my schedule is a little bit tight here with teaching. I'm the only instructor for the course that I'm teaching. So, and it's a required course for graduation. So it's not always easy, but I can make arrangements if I have enough notice.
Yes, fantastic. I will give you all the details when I will.
Okay.
I will give you some
Perfect.
details in
And
private.
come and see me here in my city too. It's beautiful here. I can show you beautiful things here too.
Yes, I will. Yes, and I will come there also. Yes.
Yes, and then I'll go there. It'll just be fun. We'll just go
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Thank
just-
you so much. I
just
really always, it's
love
such a
you.
pleasure. And
one let's say aloha bao your oi.
yes, aloha. And then you'd say ahui ho,
Ahui ho.
ahui ho.
Ahui ho.
Yes. And also, again, Raj, thank you for in advance for helping me with you know, saving all my videos and all of that. I do appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Me over here trying to up my tech game, you know. I lived in the middle of nowhere for so long, and
no,
oh my gosh.
and no, Dr. Corey, that Successworld one. It's
What was that?
I said Successworld one is your family, and you have a
Hmm.
great family from around the world.
I love this. That's
We love
my
you
favorite.
very, very much.
Oh. Now I'm going to start working on all of my other languages.
And from now, you are our president, Successworld one, Hawaii.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. I love
Okay.
that. I
Yes.
love you all. I really do.
Yes.
I mean that sincerely.
And we will
And-
make the official nomination. We love you very much. And
Love you and keep you with your ho'oponopono. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you.
yes,
Yes.
I will practice, and everyone with us has to practice that.
With the intention to share this with the
I
whole
will
world.
share that. I will do that, practice that with the intention to share to all humanity.
Yes.
Declare myself
From within yourself and out to humanity. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And I was given permission, just so we all know, I was given permission by one of my Hawaiian friends to share this aloha with the broader world. I told him I was leaving the island and I was given the blessing to share aloha. So,
Oh, wow.
so it's very tradition to
aloha
not
to all
share things unless you've been given permission by Kumu and others. So that's why we, like, I wouldn't even be able to, I would not even practice, teach lomi lomi to anyone because I was not given permission from my Kumu to teach. Although I am given permission to practice. I can teach other kinds of massage, but technically lomi I cannot. So there you go. Yeah.
Wow.
So we
Yes,
honor the
yes.
traditions, right? It's yeah, it's a deep tradition. And the medicine man, medicine woman, traditionally was always considered, it was divinely given to them, that position and that information. And so it was always to be shared freely. So makes it tough in a capitalist society. That's another one of those ethical dilemmas where I've had to make peace.
I believe that the Hawaiian tradition is I mean the medicine and all that. It's a mix of Asia, Middle East, because the Arab also have certain.
Absolutely, all over the world. Native American, Native European,
the animals and all that.
Absolutely.
And for example, the animals, the Muslim people, when they are eating the before to eat the animals, when they are killing the animal, they are making prayer, and this is before to kill the animal, they are making prayer.
Were you speaking of halal?
Yes, halal,
yes,
and this is why we are calling that halal. And the Jewish people is kasher.
Right.
So
right, exactly.
We are thanking the animal to
exactly
give us his life, its life, to feed me. And
exactly.
It is just amazing.
Exactly. And this is also through ancient Europe too, all of the tribal cultures. So every landmass everywhere at one time has had these tribal native cultures, whether you're talking about the ancient Slavs or Celts or I mean, all of the hunting, gathering, the Native American tribes, the Native, South American tribes, these tribal cultures. But interesting because in modern times, when you're talking about kosher and you're talking about halal, you're talking about that traditional practice has still carried over and made that, continue that memory that that's a gift and that's a blessing and that we need to express gratitude because we're being sustained not only by Creator, but also by our fellow companions on the planet.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Okay.
Very happy.
Love you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you very much. And
thank you.
If anyone has to say something, so we will end this classroom and we will meet next week. Now it's the Thursday, not anymore the Monday. Every Thursday at 5 p.m. France time.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And also feel free to email me if you ever something comes up and you're curious or questions. And I shared my email last week.
I told you I will come to visit you there, and I have a conference in Hawaii, so I have to come there, and of course I want to meet you there.
Yes, and when you come here, we will plan an adventure. I will plan an adventure for you in the forest here. We'll go to the caves. I live where there's over 6,000 caves.
Oh, wow.
And quartz crystals and even craters that expel diamonds.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm in a new magical place. I only live in magical places, that's all.
And yes, and I love all what is natural, and this is why I am vegetarian. I cannot eat the animal.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yes, I hear you. I shared my story with you of this.
Yeah. So yes, thank you very much, lady.
Thank you.
Lady
Aloha. Blessings to all of you. Have a wonderful week.
Yes, beautiful week. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.